I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood with a strong Liberian community, but I was constantly the only Black face in white spaces. From my cheer team to my dance team to being the only out of like 5 people that were Black in a PWI from my high school. This could have shaped me. It could have changed my trajectory and altered how I viewed myself and others. Especially when it comes to dating. That's how we get an Onyeka. Onyeka is a first-generation Nigerian American who I remember first coming on my screen from The Bachelor. Onyeka didn't do so well on that show. The show wasn't exactly curated for people of color to thrive, so I wasn't surprised. I hadn't heard much from her either until she gained into prominence over TikTok from her recent series, The Danish Deception. I thought this would be a really nice way to end my week, since this is the end of the first week of my series on my channel detailing my recent trip to Nigeria called The December I Turned Dirty. Get it? Well, you should definitely check it out after you watch this. And before I forget, let me introduce myself. I'm Charlize Martin, your Liberian American princess, and this is the LAP podcast. If you remember the Who the F Did I Marry series, well, to jog your memory, a creator called Risa Tisa had the entire internet at the palm of her hands with a series on TikTok detailing her dramatic story of deceit and betrayal from her ex-husband last year. She went viral, gained a lot of notoriety, was signed to an agency, and now is a full-time creator. Her series changed the trajectory of the entire industry and the creator economy, notifying a shift in what people want to see online. They wanted real stories, real honesty, and boy, did people engage with the content. The Who the F Did I Marry series led to Risa Tisa's success, and many creators have tried to emulate it since. Aneka has to be the boldest creator to do so. I've never seen a creator attempt a Risa Tisa story and blatantly say it in their intro of their own series, and comparing it to Risa Tisa's story again and again throughout her own series. She actually claimed that her story was worse. Well, we'll see. This is a 25-part series with somebody who was quite long-winded and didn't take a whole lot of time to edit. So let's start from the beginning. Onyeka talks about going on a trip to, what is it this time? Croatia. That's where we start off. That's the first trip, Croatia. She meets this guy with blonde hair and blue eyes, and he's Danish, and she's very attracted to him, and she's swept off of her feet immediately. And, they exchange Instagrams, no numbers, but just Instagrams, and they DM throughout the trip and after, and to the point where he invites her to Ibiza. That's part 1. Part 2, she said no because she has to go to work. And he became even more persistent, she says. I'm reading my notes on my computer. After that, they're still only communicating through Instagram. He invites her to his work trip in Monaco. She thinks about it for some time, then says yes, and gives him her passport. A man who's you don't even have his number. He doesn't even have your number, but you're giving him your passport information. A man that you just met on a trip randomly. That was the first throwing caution to the wind moment, and it does not end there. After she gives him the passport, this is when she then decides to give him her phone number, and then he starts calling her. And this is throughout these phone calls that he starts giving more information. They grow closer. This is when she finds out that he was previously in a 4-year relationship that ended only 4 months ago, which she thinks is enough time to be over that. And she does say that they fell in love over the phone. And he then gives her a big piece of information that's going to come back a lot. And he says, when I marry you, or if I marry you, you're gonna meet the queen. And says that, I hold a royal title. And he gives her a link to something that just has some man whose last name is the same as his. And she doesn't look into it at all, any further, doesn't do any investigation on this at all whatsoever, right? Okay, is that it for part 2? No, it's not. She then says, I was a bit nervous about the trip, if he was going to be scary. What if he was going to be a killer? This is still some guy that's really a stranger pretty much, and that she hasn't spent a whole lot of time with, let alone time alone. And The thing about first dates is that you want to put yourself in a position to be safe. And she wasn't really looking out enough for her safety, if you ask me, going to another country, giving him her passport. All of these things so far to me, and this is just part 1 and 2, all of these things so far to me show somebody that doesn't have enough care for her own safety. So now let's get into part 3. So part 3, she finally gets her bachelor hug. You know, she's at the airport, she sees him, you know, she does the run and jump that you see a lot on The Bachelor. And, you know, he says, hey, Bambi, and they make out for 2 minutes and they barely make it to the hotel room, and then they go into the fantasy suite, if you know what I mean. Okay, now part 4. There, she starts networking throughout the business events at the party, and she gets invited to the boat party the next day, and she has a good time. Then they go to Saint-Tropez the next day and finally looks something up. But the something that she looks up is how much that hotel room costs. And she then tells him, I'm so grateful. And then she starts crying at the restaurant saying, I'm in love with you, and bawls her eyes out in the middle of the restaurant. She passes out, doesn't know how it started. Her now boyfriend says, have you had experience with epilepsy? She realizes there's a pool of blood and urine around her and him, and they take her away with a fire truck. And once they're in the hospital, because there's still restrictions from COVID, he isn't able to stay with her as a guest. And so on his way out, that's when he decides to tell her, I love you. And she compares this to the Reesa Teesa situation with Reesa Teesa's tire blowing out. Remember that story. Here's why this is not like Reesa Teesa. Reesa Teesa doesn't waste people's time like this girl does. She is very long-winded and gives a lot of fluff and is not that self-aware. So if you're watching the series, she's happy and like visibly smiling throughout giving this account of horrible things that later happened to her. And Reesa Teesa from the first episode is regretful, remorseful, takes into account throughout this that like, I know this was stupid. Oh no, I shouldn't have done this. Thinking back, Like she thinks over and takes an actual reflection of her story. And that's the dialogue that she has. And that's how come people were more receptive to it, because we didn't have to tell her that none of this sounds good. This doesn't sound like a good idea. And Reesa Teesa didn't glamorize her relationship to the point where you weren't able to root for her. That's what happens with Onyeka. She puts herself in a position through this dialogue where she's almost trying to make reason with all of the choices that she makes. And that's why it doesn't work, because if you're not willing to accept your fault fully and you're not creating that type of dialogue where you're acknowledging, I shouldn't have done the passport thing. I should have considered my safety more when flying out to Monaco to meet this guy. She doesn't talk in depth enough about that, and she gives a lot of fluff and romanticizes the account to the point where she tries to make it this like huge romantic love story, but no one's buying it. And so that's what makes it different from Reesa Teesa. Okay, so we're still on part 4. Let's see. He flies to Dallas a week after. This is when she then admits that to her parents that she's in love with a man from Denmark. He buys this property in Denmark, asks her advice on the purchase. And then when he comes, she gives him a big sign that says, welcome to Dallas, my Danish man. So that's a choice. Part 5, she got it bad. She got it bad. Okay. That's how she opens up part 5. She's like, I realized that I have it bad. This is when you realize you have it bad. Okay. Now, she made him some red stew and rice. And mind you, this is a girl who said, you know, I don't really cook like that, but I'll cook for a great man. I'm not gonna lie, I'm this way too. I have a hard time cooking for myself, like regularly, but whenever I'm like at my boyfriend's, I do become a tad bit more domestic and I do end up cooking more. I just do. So I do get her on that. I'll give her that. Where was I? Okay, so he meets her friends at brunch, wins them over, drops that he's an Olympian, says that he didn't even play but has bronze and silver medals. She doesn't look into it at all. No one does, which is also concerning, because it's like, it's not like she's not the only one that knows that he said that. her friends were there too. Like, that's how it even comes out in conversation, which is interesting. Now she's bawling her eyes out having to separate from him because he now has to go to Denmark. She says that she's willing to move to Denmark at this point because that's how much she can't be away from him. And the apartment complex that he recently bought that was in conversation in part 4 is now in need of construction. He asks his dad for a $50,000 loan because that's normal. Dad says no. She offers to loan him some money, some of it. He says no. Couple days go by. He says no. She's still offering him money, and the amount keeps on dwindling. So it's like one day it's 10K, then it goes down to 6K. She ends up paying him $5,000. It's at this point that it is giving a full Nigerian prince scam for me. For me. Okay? Now, if you're watching this, you are officially part of my royal village. So you might as well subscribe so I can keep telling you these stories. Okay, now let's get into part 6. He comes to Dallas, becomes even more embedded in her community, leaves again, she's depressed again. And then now his uncle who recently passed away, he has a bad back and his dad is in the hospital. So that's what's going on with him. He then comes back to Dallas again. He goes to her gala that she has planned where she now introduces him to her entire Nigerian community. She's impressed with his comfortability in integrating himself. Part 7. He got into a bad fight with his sister, lands in the hospital, doesn't want her to come. Once he's in the clear, he starts saying he wants to get away. So they go to Paris. You're going to start seeing a reoccurring thing where it's like they're going on trips where they shouldn't be going on trips. And this is something that she does not acknowledge enough. We're on like trip number 5 before she like recognizes maybe we shouldn't have done that. Okay. Now, back to what I was saying about part 7. Let's see. Yeah, they go to Paris. He made a transfer from his business account to his personal account, asked for a loan from his mom. Mom says she'll only give it to him if he stays for a couple of days. Onyeka says, no, you should do that. He says, no, I need to get away. So she says, okay, I'll cover it. That makes sense. They have a great time. They start looking into immigration attorneys. That's how much time they had in the fantasy suite, if you ask me. Now, it's going to take 18 months, says the immigration attorney, for him to get a permanent residency. She says, I'll just marry you. I would marry you tomorrow. Onyeka says to this man that she hasn't known for a year, maybe it's like around 6 months at this point, that she will marry him. That's part 7 in a 25-part series. Okay, now we get to part 8. Now she wants to drop the bomb that, yeah, this is my ex-husband. No one's surprised, but okay. She thinks that she's doing a great job telling this story, though, by the way. They finally have a real talk. She already said, I'll marry you tomorrow. Now they want to have a real talk about getting married, okay? After the real talk, they decide to get married. So what I mean by real talk is they're talking about, like, finances. They're talking about religion. They're talking about kids. They're talking about, like, what does their life trajectory look like if they were to be in a lifelong partnership together, right? That's what I mean by real talk. So he looks into selling his home. He gets an offer off market, and it's for $500,000. There's a power outage at his apartment complex. Now he's asking for $5K from Onyeka. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. He just like, can you give me $5,000? And she does it. Like, what kind, like, straight up, like, telling me, like, can you give me $5,000? It's crazy. It's crazy. But she has created an environment in which she thinks, like, this is okay. Because she was so insistent the first time. Like, no, like, please let me help you. He like, I need help here. Give me money. So that's the type of relationship that she's now, in dynamic that she's now created for herself. And she doesn't acknowledge that enough for me. She doesn't acknowledge that enough. So he now owes her $10K. Let's keep record of that, kind of, sort of. I lose track in my notes. I do, because things get crazy. Now, his friend has a plane business and needs an investment, and he just needs help really bad. And Onyeka thinks that this is going to be a good thing because she's still under the impression that he'll make the money back from selling his home. He proposes. They go to the courthouse and get married, have a little cabin in the woods weekend. Does he give her back any of the money after he sells the house? Because the sale goes through. No, he does not. Part 9. He gets a crazy tax bill and she loans him $15,000 and then has to do it in $3,000 increments. Her dad gives him an Ibogaine. He then now finally asks for his daughter's hand in marriage, even though they already married. His friend is short in a certain amount to buy the house for him and his wife. So he asks Mr. Boyfriend, Mr. Denmark, Mr. Husband now, sorry, for a loan after giving him a loan. That's why she agrees to give him $3,000 and then makes them Instagram official. So this leads to, I spoke too soon. Let me read the full sentence. And goes Instagram official with him and they go on a trip to Cabo. Okay. Now, around 15 Danish people are watching her story over the course of a week, and we take note of this. So he tells her, I feel like you should just block them. And she says, oh, okay. So that's what happens with that. I have to point out the fact that he is really bad with money. And this is before we even get to like part 10 or anything. It was so evident before the marriage, but like even now during that, like he is now putting her in a financial disadvantage and it's stressful. And this is like a very toxic situation, and it's just this is a classic Nigerian prince scam. It's so obvious to me, like literally, like it's not the Danish Deception, it's the Danish prince, like down to like the whole like, oh, you know, I have a title, oh, my money's tied up in this way, but I'll pay you back, but I have all of these different lands, I have this apartment complex that I'm running and that's making money for me, and da 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 da. You gonna meet the queen. Ridiculous. Part 10. She goes to brunch immediately when she lands in Denmark and meets all of his friends and their partners. The next day, they go on a hometown date, if you get my Bachelor references. And she loves his mom's cooking. His parents' home wasn't given title holders, apparently. She says that it's humbler than expected. And there is a bit of tension in the family, so that's to be noted. They stay at Copenhagen for a while, have a great time over there. Then they hop on a plane to Nigeria for her grandmother's burial, and he has a really good time there acclimating to her community. And then they head back to Denmark. While in Denmark, she's still working from home through all of this. A realtor reaches out to hubby now and says a wealthy family wants to buy the apartment. The deal goes through and it should hit his account within 6 weeks. They decide to go to Portugal because that makes sense. He decides to tell her to quit her job on the trip to Portugal since she's so unhappy, and they go on a trip to Miami and then to Denmark. So while in Denmark, his dad ends up back in the hospital. This is part 12 now. They have to separate, and she's depressed again because they're apart and she's alone in Dallas. And now, added on top of that, the financial stress. His accounts are on hold and his assets are frozen. She feels like there were some red flags. Finally, she's still fully supporting him though. He gets an allowance of around $4,000 a month. She loves him more than she cares about the money still. So she says this in part 12. And he does pay her back finally, something. It's $9K. He leaves for Denmark and his dad is back in the hospital. Now, this is during the holidays. So this is like Christmas Eve when he decides to tell her that there's an insurance payment that's hit his account that's wiped everything out on Christmas Eve. And this is her first Christmas in Denmark. So she starts to sense the BS. This is still a holiday type party that they're at with all of his friends, his hometown friends, and she learns at this party about his gambling addiction for the very first time ever. And they're married. Happy holidays. So, where was I? Part 13. She finally confronts him, finally asks for proof. She saw his bank statements and checks it out. They talk about going on vacation for their anniversary, but decide against it. Thankfully, finally, a trip they don't go on, right? He decides to buy an expensive bottle of wine that is around $500 at an anniversary dinner, gets invited to a bar by her friend for her birthday, and he gets belligerently drunk. They get into a fight, a screaming match, in fact, and he leaves the house and stays at a hotel for the night. Part 14, he goes for more of his things and ends up staying. He's overspending, and that's upsetting her. So in the back of her mind, she's not comfortable with the fact that he just spent $2,000 in one night. Then a couple days later, her friend messages her saying that her husband is owed $200,000 by her husband. Friend's hubby is called Crypto for the remainder of the story, okay? Crypto has an investigator look into the situation and discovers that his wallet is tied to a gambling website. He finally comes clean about the gambling addiction. When she confronts him, she has him go to Gamblers Anonymous and goes with him. Crypto has the idea to look into a PI. She agrees. Part 15. She reversed Google image search the apartment he sold a year ago, realizes the pictures are from an interior designer. She confronts him about the Olympics. She threatens to call his mom. He confesses that he is not an Olympian and confirms that he lied about the apartment too. Onyeka convinces herself that his gambling addiction stems from a desire to provide a lavish lifestyle for her, when in factuality he saw her as a wealthy woman who would be able to feed his addiction problem. She convinces herself that Colombia is an affordable trip for them to make, so they restart their 90 days. Part 16. Aneka and hubby go over to Crypto and his wife's house to apologize. He proposes to Aneka in Colombia with a ring this time, and they start planning a wedding. At this point, my patience is weighing thin. And you're probably wondering, how did I get through all of this? I didn't watch this alone. I watched it on Cat Black's live stream, and she gets fed up with the story like I do. So Cat Black makes the executive decision to go on ahead and skip all the way to part 19. So this is how part 19 opens up. Part 19, she finally says she's not going to waste our time. Hubby owes $10,000 on their wedding now. His green card has been approved, and now they're taking trips to Spain, Denmark for his father's funeral, and then Portugal to look at wedding venues. Now, we skip again to part 21. He cancels the weddings through text. He says he wants a divorce in person at their place with her friend there. They're talking alone in their room, but the friend is still present, like within the vicinity. He says, "You only love me when there's money in my account." She says, "You're the love of my life." He replies, "You were the love of my life." And he's packed to leave for Denmark. She drives her friend to her other friend's home in Dallas to visit, and she sends him a text saying, "I have your passport and green card." This is when he sends the text, "I don't care if you tell everybody everything." She's falling on the floor, crying, throwing up. You get the reference. She comes clean to everyone, to her friends, to her family, and to her little sister, who then reveals he stole $3,000 from her. Part 22. She finally sends a mean text to him. She then checks in on all of her friends to see who else he stole from. Every call that she makes, they say yes, including her cousin, who they were godparents to. She confronts his family for not telling her about the gambling, and finally realizes that he doesn't have a royal title, and it is confirmed by them. She unblocks his ex on Instagram and DMs her. He owes $10,000 to so many people based off the lie about it being a surprise for Onyeka. She is then contacted by ex-hubby's sister and his ex-girlfriend. Part 23. Turns out it was a 7-year relationship with the ex, and he left his ex-girlfriend for Onyeka. So yes, she was the other woman. She now reveals to her parents that she is already legally married. She finds out he scammed her dad too. Her dad says what he took is a drop in the bucket, and we are going to handle this as a family. He also stole from his mentor, who is also from Denmark. Part 24, the mentor sues him. He gave him a fake Rolex, watches as collateral for an investment that they were making. She cuts off communication with her ex, and now he's texting her over and over again. ChatGPT apologies. She files for divorce. He blows up her phone again. Part 25. We've reached it. He shows up out of nowhere in Dallas while she's walking the dog. She screams bloody murder. She now sends a breakup text that is really long. It ends with her saying, "Leave me the F alone." He responds, "I understand now." Someone informs Onyeka that he was found in public to be with someone who appears to be a sex worker while they're still married. Turns out she's a weed dealer, according to ex-hubby. So, not done yet, because now there's a conclusion episode. Onyeka diagnoses him with narcissism. He conned another girl while being in a relationship with Onyeka and the ex, and she is now trying to build a case against him to put him in jail. Now let's talk about the backlash that she's received from Black women over her story, the Danish Deception. Most of this stems from them not understanding how she got into this mess, and I agree with all of them. And so I'm going to be also linking all of their videos down. People like Jessie Wu, Kat Black, for example, and so many others who I've taken initiative from to make this video and to also give my lens to the whole situation. Because I am too a lover girl, but the thing is that you can't decide to love someone more than you love yourself. And this kind of situation doesn't happen unless there is this denial of actually being self-reliant, being self-sufficient, and also loving yourself enough to say no. She didn't love herself enough to not give him $5,000. She didn't love herself enough to not give him access to her entire family to also scam. She didn't love herself enough to say no. She didn't love herself enough to cut him off. She didn't love herself enough to not give him her passport information. She didn't love herself enough. That's the only way this type of thing happens. So that's my biggest gamble with all of this. She seems more concerned with the way how things look, the way how things appear, and she seems more hell-bent on being a wife than actually the quality of that relationship. And she shows this by how she even explains this entire story. And that's why it's not similar to Risa Tisa at all. Risa Tisa, even from the title of her situation, takes ownership of the fact that she should have done more research before getting married to the person in the first place. Onyeka doesn't own enough of the situation for anyone to be able to really, truly side with her. She makes it really hard to root for her. And I can't blame anybody for not doing so. So I am on the road to 1,000 subscribers. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do join the Royal Village by subscribing. Give me a hype, give me a like, and be sure to watch this space.